let's talk about types of trust. So we have all the revocable and irrevocable and all that we talked about. But these are just mechanisms inside the trust. They're not the actual type of the trust. Now let's talk about types of trust, like revocable living trust. So what is a revocable living trust? Well, we know it's revocable. We know it's grantor. We know it's not going to have any asset protection because it's revocable. It's great for avoiding probate, and it's great for passing an estate. It's not great for creditor protection. It has a purpose. It's actually the most popular type of trust there is. There's more revocable living trusts, I would guess, than any other type of trust out there because they are so common for estate planning. Because they do a really good thing. They avoid probate and they make things simpler and they make sure you're going to get, maximize your estate tax exemptions and you're going to pass things smoothly. You're not going to have this public process. And, they were popularized in like the 60s. And like I said, even up to, when I graduated law school in the 90s, they were pretty much used everywhere except New York, as far as I knew. I'm going to guess New York still is not big on them. They were really into their wills in New York. I don't know. Life insurance trust. What do you think that is? Trust for life insurance, yeah. Right? So what would be the purpose of a life insurance trust though? Like why would you need a separate trust just for life insurance? Well, life insurance has a set of rules around it that determines how it's included in whose estate. So if you buy a $10 million death benefit life insurance policy and you own it yourself, when you die, the $10 million goes to your beneficiary, but for the purposes of estate tax, it's included in your estate. That could be a problem. Because if you already have a $30 million estate and then you add another $10 million that you didn't even get, now you're going to pay tax. You're going to pay $4 million of tax on that $10 million policy. So a life insurance trust is designed to own life insurance and keep it out of your estate because ownership of the policy determines includability in the estate. It's an irrevocable trust. Good call. Yeah, because if it was a revocable trust, what would happen? Included in the estate. So this type of trust, by its nature, needs to be an irrevocable trust. Well, first of all, what is a trust? And as a contract, does it have any shares? Does it have any membership interests? It doesn't. So no one owns a trust. And this is one of the confusing things. People think, oh, a trust is owned by, but no, a trust is a contract. So there are interested parties to the trust. There are assets to the trust that have a beneficial interest in the beneficiaries. There's a trustee who has legal title, but no one actually owns the trust itself. So the answer to your question, can a trust own another trust? No. Can a trust be connected to and have an interest in another trust? Yes. Yeah, not all states have the same exemption. So some states have a very low state tax, so it might not be as much, but it still could be significant. You mentioned charitable trust. What's a charitable trust? Well, a charitable trust normally is a trust that's set up during your life, and normally it's going to be for a charity, so it has a charitable intent, and it's kind of like the charitable remainder trust or some type of charitable trust where you're going to give an asset to the trust for the benefit of a charity, but you don't just want to give it to the charity directly. Remember, when you give money to charity, you get a deduction. So you don't pay tax on the amount that you give to charity. So if you make $1 million and you give $500,000 to charity, that comes off the $1 million that you made. Up to, I think it's 50% of your income you can give to charity. So, but if you don't want to give it just straight to a charity, you can give it to a charitable trust that you still can have some control over, up to and including some future withdrawals from that trust. Well, if you do it with a charitable trust, depending on how it's drafted, you may not get the write-off for the full amount because you may not be actually giving the full amount. You may be giving a percentage of it. And so they have to do some math and some actuarial to determine the present value of the actual gift to determine what it is that you're actually giving, and that becomes your deduction. Even if it's money, yeah. Yeah, but if I give you $1 in a trust and you're never gonna actually get the whole dollar and I'm gonna get 50 cents back, how much did I really give you? And again, these are all complicated things. You gotta remember, the law is a hacked up pork sausage that has been made with a whole bunch of special interests. So a lot of times it doesn't make sense. It's like, well, wait a second, why would you do it that way? Well, because this guy had this lobbyist, this industry had this lobbyist. I mean, why is life insurance proceeds not taxed? Lobbyists. Why? Insurance companies wanted to sell insurance. Well, how do you sell insurance? You have to pay big commissions to salespeople to sell insurance. How can you afford to pay big commissions? You have to have some other benefit to life insurance that will offset the cost of the life insurance. Life insurance companies are incredibly profitable and life insurance salespeople make a lot of money. So that means life insurance is not a very good deal generally. But if life insurance companies can lobby Congress to say, hey, yeah, we're going to make it very expensive to buy this, but we're going to make it a benefit because you're not going to pay tax on it later, they can make the math work. And that's effectively what life insurance is. It's a tax preferred investment at the behest of lobbyists that make it very, reasonable to buy because it actually does work out, even though it's incredibly expensive. And that's the way almost everything is in this world. I caught the last of what Tom was saying about mutual funds and how mutual funds, it's like, they're so expensive. By the time you get done, you're 80% of your investment didn't go to you. What is our military budget? How much do we spend on the military each year? So it's traditionally been like 900 and something billion dollars. Now we're going to up it to 1.5 trillion, right? So how much do we spend on healthcare in this country? 5 trillion, $4.7 trillion on healthcare. For what is arguably ranked like the 29th best healthcare system in the world. Like, we're not talking about the #1 healthcare system. We're talking about $5 trillion for a very poor healthcare system. Right, why? Massive interest. Massive financial interest. So that's how we get our law. That's how we get laws that apply here one way, there another way, to this person one way, to this person another way. And so, our job as advisors is to figure out what the arbitrage is in there. What can we do? How can we help our clients to stay within the law, but get the maximum benefit? And so what Tom does with the 4 quadrants, which he did the 4 quadrants for you today. Okay, so the 4 quadrants is brilliant. To me, it's my favorite thing because he's just saying, look, you can't stay in this quadrant of self-employed. You've got to get yourself into this quadrant as an investor. That's what gets you into the rules that make it so that you can't pay tax, because that's how our system is set up. The investor class to invest. And so you have to, if you want to change your tax, you have to change your facts, right? So same thing here. Everything is just a function of how are we going to fit our facts to make it work. And so understanding, that's why I like to explain things so that when you understand it, then you can understand why, oh, this makes sense for me, because it puts me in these fact patterns so I can protect my assets. And we are going to answer that question. How can we protect assets even if the system with stroke of the pen is completely dissolved? How do we do it? Okay, special needs trust. Yeah, special needs child. Somebody with the rules around special needs are if you want to apply for aid, government aid, you can't have any assets of your own. So, but what if you want to leave money for your special needs child, but not disrupt their ability to apply for aid? You can leave it in a special needs trust, which doesn't give them a right to that income. It doesn't give it any, but they can the trustee can have a discretionary authority to distribute assets for the benefit, right? Dynasty generation skipping, right? What is that? So when you die with a revocable living trust and you have, let's say, 3 kids, you die with your revocable living trust and you say at death, divide equally between my 3 kids. What happens to the trust? Shut down. Distributed, final paperwork done, it's over, it's gone, right? Kids now have the money, they got their problem. They got to figure it out. What if you don't want that to happen? What if you say, actually, I don't want it just for my kids. I got enough money that I don't really think my kids need it. I think my grandkids might need it, and they're only 5 and 6 and 7, and then maybe even their kids. Can't I just keep this trust going? So you can keep it going. And you actually even get a tax benefit for keeping it going, because we have something called the GST election, which is the generation skipping tax election, where you can allocate a certain portion of your gift to skip the generation and skip the estate tax again. So a dynasty trust is a trust that is designed to continue on. Now, can you have a revocable living trust that converts into a dynasty trust at death? You can. This is interesting trust because it's kind of was reserved for the uber wealthy. And then now I think through social media, it's being talked about a lot more. So I'm getting a lot more calls about people saying, hey, what about a dynasty trust? And then I have to explain what it is and how it works. And I think it's a good idea, because the reality is that, if you have a small estate, leaving your kids a few $100,000 each, probably just fine. We don't need to hold that money because they probably need it. They probably know damn well how to use it. They're going to pay off a mortgage or buy a house or do something good with it. However, if you've got 10 million, well, maybe now we need to be thinking, or maybe even just 5 million. Maybe we don't want to just drop that on your kids, right? Maybe even $1 million is too much to drop on your kids. So we can set it up to where they don't just get it all at once, where it can be metered out to them, or there can be conditions around it, or it can just be fully discretionary with the discretion left to somebody that you trust to use that discretion. So these are becoming a lot more popular again because I believe they're being talked about a lot more. But yes, this would be the kind of thing that people would be referring to when they talk about the Rockefellers, is that they are putting things in trust for generations. Yeah. If you don't have any grandchildren, would you use a generation skipping trust? Well, are you never going to have grandchildren, or you just don't have them yet? Don't know. So what you can leave is you can leave a formula in the trust, and you can leave a space for them. Say, if we have grandchildren, then this. Yeah. Yeah. Because we don't know. Maybe we don't know how many grandchildren we're going to have. We're crossing our fingers for a couple at least. Okay, so Dynasty Trust. So let me clear something up about taxes with trusts. And so they sent me this video of this guy, and he was just talking complete bullshit about this trust owns this trust, and this trust owns this trust, and in the end, nobody owns anything and there's no tax. And so I responded, look, it just doesn't work that way. Somebody's got to pay the tax. Trusts are not exempt from tax. There is no version of trust that you can just magically say, oh, exempt from tax. We've done enough things. It's a constitutional trust. It's a business trust. It's a discretionary non-grantor FUBU trust. Whatever it is, somebody's got to pay the tax. The tax is either going to get paid by the grantor who created the trust, by the beneficiaries who get distributions from the trust, or by the trust itself. But somebody's got to pay the tax. And so when you're talking about the tax, you're always talking about just who pays it and at what tax rate. And so if the grantor pays it, they're paying it at the grantor's trust tax rate, which may be fine. If the trust is paying it, we're paying it at the trust tax rates, which are high and start early. And so you almost never really want the trust paying a bunch of tax. Now, if the trust has no income, it just owns shares of stock, then it can be a trust tax rate type of trust, which would be a complex, irrevocable, non-grantor trust, but there's no income to pay tax on. It's just holding shares. That's fine. Or it's going to be paid by the beneficiaries, either as a beneficiary defective grantor trust where they are considered the grantor for tax purposes, or because they received actual distributions from the trust and those distributions are taxed at their trust tax rate, which may be better than your trust tax rate, depending on how much money they make versus how much money you make. But one way or another, somebody's got to pay the tax on every trust out there. That's a great question. So the question is, well, who pays the tax in the time when there's not really any distributions being made? Well, it depends. Is there any income, and is there any tax to even be paid? If it's just holding stock and not selling it, there's no tax to be paid unless the stock receives a dividend. If it's just real estate, is it cash flowing? Does it have income? Okay, so if you've got cash flowing real estate in there and there's a net income to it, which again, with depreciation rules, there might not be any, right? You might be having a zero on your tax return. So first thing to figure out is there going to be income to tax? If the trust is a complex type of dynasty trust where it's not required to distribute income, then the trust will file the tax return. But there may not be any tax due because there's no actual tax owed because you didn't actually make any money. Just like a person, you can make $1 million and pay no tax if you have $1 million of expenses, right? That's called a not profitable business. It just depends, but this is the thing. A lot of people get caught up of like, oh, who's gonna pay the tax? And they don't ask the question, is there a tax? Do we even have a tax? And a lot of times the answer is no, there's no tax. There's no tax due. Yeah, as long as the tax got paid at the C Corp level and it filed C Corp taxes, and there was no dividend from the C Corp to the trust, then the trust doesn't owe any tax. So it's just like if the trust owns Apple stock, Apple might pay corporate tax. Unless there's a dividend, then you don't have to pay anything when you hold it. The trust wouldn't have to. That's why the dividend issue is so important. So if you have a growth stock with no dividends, you don't have any income, there's no tax. Unless you sell the stock and have a capital gain, then you have a tax, right? So it's just, if you're trying to set this up kind of for yourself, you would set it up in such a way that you have corporate tax at the C Corp level. Maybe you're just paying 21% like you said, which is less than your personal tax rate. And then the trust is not getting a dividend. It won't have to pay any tax. Well, it depends on how the trust is set up, whether it's going to be includable in your state or not, right? If the trust is a grantor style trust, then it's going to be includable in your state. You have unrealized gain of $2 million in the account. You started with $1 million, now we're $3 million, so you have $2 million of unrealized gain. And that investment account is in the trust, right? You die, and it's a revocable living trust, so it's just an estate planning trust. You die, your kids, your beneficiaries will get a step up in basis in the investment account. So now their basis in the account is $3 million instead of your original $1 million. They could turn around and sell that stock for $3 million and pay no tax at all. And as long as that whole amount of your estate is under the $30 million between two people or $15 million apiece, then there's no estate tax on it. All right, so Dynasty, generation skipping, and now asset protection. So what is an asset protection trust? Protects your assets, right? And who's it protecting the assets from, right? The legal system, creditors, predators, anybody who's a threat who wants to sue the assets. So how an asset protection trusts are set up is really important. So revocable living trust is revocable living, grantor, domestic, self-settled, no spendthrift, right? A life insurance trust is irrevocable living, grantor, or non-grantor, depending, domestic, non-self-settled, and has spendthrift provisions. Okay, a charitable trust is irrevocable living, could be grantor, could be non-grantor, normally domestic, not self-settled, has spendthrift, right? Special needs trust, irrevocable, living or testamentary, grantor or non-grantor, domestic, not self-settled, spendthrift, right? And the whole point of this series of slides is just to show you that how you do it just ends up creating the trust. Kind of back to is there a way you could ask a questionnaire and then have the questionnaire go, oh, you need this kind of trust? Absolutely. There would be a way if you ask the right questions, it would self-diagnose into exactly. We could probably just ask ChatGPT to make that questionnaire for us. It'll probably do it. Dynasty, it's going to be irrevocable, living or testamentary, grantor or non-grantor, domestic or foreign, non-self-settled, and have spendthrift provisions. And then asset protection trust. And this one is the interesting one. It's going to be irrevocable. Why do we want it irrevocable? Yeah, so if we have a revocable asset protection trust, then it can be revoked. And then it's not going to protect any assets. So living or testamentary, it needs to be set up during your life. That's the whole point, because we're trying to protect assets now during your life for your creditors. In fact, it's more important than that. It has to be set up before you have a real problem with creditors. Not before you have any creditors, because we all have creditors. We all borrow money for lots of reasons. But before you have any issues with creditors is when you want to have this type of trust set up. So if you don't have any issues with creditors, now is the time. You want to consider now to be your asset protection trust. Grantor or non-grantor? Well, but is it tax-wise? Tax-wise, remember this is the tax classification. Most all asset protection trusts are going to be grantor trusts. And why? So much like a revocable living trust where you're the grantor, you're the trustee, and you're the beneficiary, the same can be true with an asset protection trust. You're your own beneficiary. You're setting this up for yourself. So if you're setting something up for yourself and you're a beneficiary, you're automatically going to default into the grantor trust rules. So it's going to be a grantor trust. But remember, that's a good thing. That's actually what we want. Why? Why do we want grantor trust treatment for an asset protection trust? All the depreciation. We want to take advantage of all this tax planning that you guys are going to do in the next day and a half. All this tax planning is going to be like putting it in an IRA. It's not going to help you. So we want that. We also we get the step up in basis if it's grantor. So then we're going to get the tax benefit. And then we're going to pay the tax on it. And we want it to be includable in the estate. We want this to basically be kind of invisible from an estate standpoint. We're not trying to get assets out of the estate with this type of trust. We're trying to protect the assets of the estate. Okay, domestic or foreign? Well, it can be both. It could be one or the other or both. But definitely before the end of tomorrow, we're going to talk in detail about how exactly asset protection trust works. Because to skip ahead and answer your question, if you wanted a trust that you really knew could withstand any kind of attack, including stroke of the pen risk of a government that all of a sudden decides, you know what, we're just going to take assets, can you count on a domestic trust to do that? You cannot. So if you're going to do that, you're going to have a foreign trust. And the foreign jurisdictions are under a completely different set of rules. And so if you really want to be sure, then a foreign trust, and somebody said it earlier, Swiss bank account, that's the absolute platinum standard of what you'd want to do. Well, Bahamas do have a statute. I wouldn't use the Bahamas. So when it comes to asset protection trust, you have to know and consider both. And we'll go over in more detail exactly. Self-settled, non-self-settled, it could be both, but most asset protection trusts are going to be self-settled, which means you're creating it for yourself as your own beneficiary. And that's really kind of the definition of an asset protection trust. Because if I create it for my kids, if I do a Rockefeller Dynasty Trust for my kids, it's not really an asset protection trust in the way we use the term, but it's definitely going to protect assets, right? From my creditors and their creditors. But here's the thing. How many people are ready to give all their assets away to their kids? How many people in this room are ready? Anybody? Right. And most rooms that I speak with, they're not ready. They need those assets. They want to control them. They want to have access to them. They want to be the ones that determine how they get used over the next 20, 30, 40 years. And so they're not ready to do a full, irrevocable, completed gift where they don't retain any strings whatsoever because they're not sure if they're going to need the money. And so you can't really do that kind of trust if you're not ready to give away the money. So this is the alternative. You're creating a trust that's protecting the assets, but you're still the beneficiary. You're still keeping the beneficial interest yourself. And this could be done only because by statute, we have jurisdictions that statutorily allow for this. And that's the trick. And before 1984, this couldn't be done. In 1984, we got our first statute. So the Medicare rules are different. This is not a Medicare trust. Because you're the beneficiary of the trust and these assets are includable in your state, they're also includable in the calculation for Medicare. So this trust is not going to get you out of Medicare, or get you into Medicare, I should say. To do that, you'd have to use a trust that actually makes it so that you have either no interest in the assets themselves or very limited. Something like an income-only trust, where the only thing you have access to is the income of the trust, which could be very, very low, which also could include you can continue to live in the home. So that's the preferred tool for a Medicare type plan. And there's a 5-year look back period, and then it won't be included, or it'll only be included to the extent that you've retained an interest. There's a whole nother area of law for Medicaid planning, a completely different area. And it is very state driven because every state has a different set of rules. California, very easy to qualify for Medicaid. Texas, less easy, right? It just depends. So you just want to understand if that's your concern, then you want to specifically do a trust for that. Now, for everybody in this room, it's probably not a concern, and you're probably not ready, again, to give away all your assets to qualify for Medicaid. But for your parents, it might be. I don't know. I mean, you would just do a Medicaid trust, a specific trust for Medicaid. And there are other things they can do, other plans that they can do. There's some insurance that you can buy. There's certain things that you can do. No, it doesn't work that way. You can't just stack trusts like that. You can have them interconnect in some way, but they don't just, because remember, there's no ownership of trust. It's not like one trust owns the other trust. Let's get back to asset protection trust. It's going to almost always be self-settled because it's for you. And then spendthrift provisions, obviously, that's the whole point of this trust, is to put spendthrift provisions. Now, what's interesting about an asset protection trust is that you're basically saying in the trust, hey, I'm going to contribute assets to this trust for me and don't give it back to me if any of these things exist, like I have a creditor or I have a lawsuit against me. So that sounds pretty aggressive, right? Like, is that okay to do? Can you put a trust? Can you create a trust for yourself, for your own benefit, and then say, hey, but don't give it to me if I have a creditor? You have to spell it out. Remember, because you're the beneficiary, if you don't spell it out under the conditions of which you are allowed to get money back, then the court is going to go, well, you can get money back, just request the money and you can get it. So you have to put your own restrictions on access to your own money, and you have to make the trust a fully discretionary trust, the discretion resting with the trustee. So you are basically going to put money in trust, tell the trustee, hey, you have full discretion to give it back to me, but don't do it if there's a creditor. The trustee depends. And if you're going to have serious asset protection, you're going to want an asset protection trust. And then that means you're going to have to decide between what type of asset protection trust, how much control you are willing to give up, and what that is going to be in a consideration. Because the general rule is that the more control you keep, the less asset protection you have. But if you play it right, if you parse it properly, you can actually keep quite a bit of control directly and still have the asset protection. And you do that by arbitraging the foreign and the domestic statutes and the rules, so that you're basically going to say when which applies. Yeah, you can't change your will after you're dead. You definitely want to get this done right. And it's definitely so much better to do asset protection before you have any creditor issues. And again, not before you have any creditors, but before you have any creditor issues. Again, we all have creditors. Definitely before any lawsuits. Does anybody know what the rule is called that says, hey, if I have somebody pursuing me, I can't just give away my assets with an intent to delay or hinder or defraud that creditor that's trying to get my assets? Fraudulent conveyance. So there's actual statute in every single state that is either called fraudulent conveyance, fraudulent transfer, or voidable transaction. And what it basically says in every state is that if you convey an asset with an intent to delay, hinder, or defraud a creditor, then that conveyance can be reversed. just take it back. And so we need to be very careful about fraudulent transfer or fraudulent conveyance when we're funding any kind of asset protection structure, because if we fund it and then the court later says, well, you did that and we're calling it a fraudulent conveyance, they can unfund it. And if it's unfunded, is it gonna work? Not gonna work if it's unfunded. Now, is it possible to have a court deem something a fraudulent conveyance and not be able to get it back out of the trust? Must be, exactly. So it's possible that you fund a trust, the court later says, hey, that's a fraudulent conveyance, but they don't have the power to get it back out. The trust could have dispersed the assets. The assets might not be here anymore. Or the trust could be situated in a jurisdiction that is not beholden to the court that told them to do it. That's where the foreign trust comes in. It's a big, complicated jigsaw puzzle that you just have to figure out. In the end, it's actually pretty simple once you understand what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Then you can dial right into the very specific tool and you can say, okay, this is what works. This is how I want it to work. This is how it works for my situation. And these are the controls I get to keep. These are the controls I don't. These are the circumstances under which, triggered protection is going to apply. So law of trust is the greatest achievement. Again, everybody who is familiar with trust, I think falls in love with trust because they're so crazy flexible. It's also though why there's so much abuse, and there is a lot of abuse. So somebody mentioned earlier, business trust, constitutional trust. So let's talk about that a little bit. So there's a whole group of people out there that are making the claim that trusts are not governed by anything other than the Constitution, which allows for the creation of trust. And therefore, because of this, they don't have to apply to any of the other rules that got set out after the Constitution was drafted. Has anybody heard this? Sovereign citizens? There's a whole line of thinking around this idea that that's the only document that anybody has to pay any attention to, and that anything that came after it effectively is not applicable to you or suspect or can be reinterpreted or can be disputed. When you try to make an argument that I'm going to do it this way because I have this authority, and that authority is not actually recognized by the government in power, what happens in practical reality when you get caught by that government in power and they say that's not the way we interpret it? At the worst, you end up in jail, right? So there's all these promoters out there. So here's my caveat and my rule of thumb. If anybody is promising you that this is just a trust is gonna get you out of paying taxes, it's a scam. There is no trust that gets you out of paying taxes. We already established that all trusts pay taxes, either the grantor, the trust itself, or the beneficiary. Somebody's paying the tax. And there's no multiple layers of trust that can get you out of paying tax. There's no special type of trust, whether it's a pure or a constitutional or a business or whatever other word they come up with, that gets out of paying taxes. It's just not the way it works. So when you see somebody talking about trusts that can do these magic things, they don't exist when it comes to taxes particularly. You send a letter to the IRS saying I am a natural citizen of the US, but I am not, you notify me you quit paying taxes. And the reason I'm bringing this up as an asset protection attorney is because trust is one of the main tools they use. Because they're so flexible, because they're so good, because they have so much power, they contort and they misuse a trust to then say, oh, you don't have to pay taxes. It's harder to do with a corporation because people understand, the corporation has to pay tax or you have to pay tax. But with a trust, since there's confusion over the trust as a legal instrument and the trust as a tax-paying instrument. And this is what confuses people. They don't understand. You have to figure out both. And as we went through today, all those trusts are going to be one thing from a legal standpoint and a different thing from a tax standpoint, all of them. And so what you have to do is figure out what you want out of both of them. Do you want it to be a dynasty trust? Do you want it to protect assets? Do you want it to be grantor? Do you want to pay the tax? Do you want to not pay the tax? And so that's why they're great tools, but you just got to use them correctly. Anyone can create a trust. John and I just created a trust, right? It doesn't even have to technically be written down. You're obviously insane to not write down the provisions of the trust, but you definitely, anybody can create a trust. There's lots of people that provide trust. And my general rule would be if you're talking about revocable living trusts, I wouldn't be too afraid of anybody that you would find to do a revocable living trust for you. There's many non-attorneys that have come up with great systems. Integrated Trust Systems is one of them that I'm familiar with. And they have great platforms and it helps to create trust. They're very educated, they understand the law, but that's a revocable living trust. It's revocable. So if you make a mistake, you do something wrong, it's pretty easy to get just revoke it. And two, we're dealing with an area of law that is really, really well settled and well traveled, and it's not a lot of confusion around it, and they're not trying to do anything too fancy, which, you mentioned that he never used a protector. He's not trying to make it too fancy. Once you get into the higher levels of trust where we're trying to accomplish different stuff, asset protection, different tax treatment that may or may not be standard. Now we're talking about somebody who's really got an expertise in trusts that can figure this out. And I would extend this to asset protection trusts. There's a lot of people out there that in the last 30 years since I've started doing this have kind of hung up their shingle and said, now I'm an asset protection trust attorney. And they kind of get one widget, they figure out one widget and they say, okay, that's it, everybody fits this widget. It's either a domestic asset protection trust or a foreign asset protection trust, and that's where everybody's gonna go. We're just gonna put them in that. They don't really have a deep understanding even of their own widget, much less the full panoply of widgets out there that they could do. And so they just drive everybody into just a one-size-fits-all solution. So I would also be careful of those type of providers where they really just, they have one thing. There's no perfect plane. There's a perfect hangar though, and it's got a whole bunch of planes in it, right? You got something that goes high and fast, you got something that goes low and slow, you got something that lands vertically, you got all these different things. You got something with no open cockpit, you got something that goes upside down, you got all these things. Just like in your garage, there's no perfect car. You wanna go fast, you might want a Porsche. You wanna take the kids, you might want an Expedition, right? So it's the right tool for the job. And your job is to figure out, okay, what's the job I want to accomplish? Okay, for most people that I work with, the job is I want to protect my assets and I want to pass them to my family in the way that I want to pass them to my family. That makes sense. And minimize any taxes and complications and avoid probate. If that's your goals, then you would want an asset protection trust, right? And so we'll talk about what kind, but you probably don't need a fully foreign asset protection trust offshore with the costs and complications and compliance with a fully foreign trust. You may want just a hybrid between the two. You might just want a simple revocable living trust if you don't have a lot of assets to protect, right? But if you want to protect assets and you have some assets to protect and you want to pass the estate, then you're going to want an asset protection trust, but one that's designed for that purpose. The trust that I'll tell you the name that I use, which is called a bridge trust. So what a bridge trust is it's an asset protection trust that has both a foreign and a domestic jurisdiction attached to it. And so it's something I created. I've been using for 30 years. Tom and I use it extensively. He loves it because it's so simple and it doesn't complicate his life like a foreign trust does. I love it because it protects assets just as strong as a foreign trust because it is a foreign trust. It's just treated as a foreign trust from the foreign jurisdiction and as a domestic trust by the US. And so we'll go into more detail, but that's what I use for most of my clients that want those things. I mean, most trusts are going to have ongoing costs. Unless you're talking about just a revocable living trust where they draft it once and then they hand it to you and that's it. No protector. That's another reason not to use a protector. Protector usually costs money. But any kind of asset protection trust is absolutely going to have an ongoing cost because you got parties to the trust that have to all stay involved. The trust has to stay current. And here's my feeling on ongoing fees. If I'm hiring a professional and they're going to just charge me a flat fee and never charge me again, I find a different professional. Because there is no way they're going to do a great job if they charge me a flat fee. That's somebody who's selling a product. And that once they sell it, they're done and they're out. And they don't want to build a service system. They don't want to build a support structure for their clients. They just want to sell their widget and be done. And there's plenty of people out there like that. I want to pay an annual fee. I want the support. I want the maintenance. I even want to pay for my software. I want to pay. Why? I want it updated. I want it current. I want stuff. And I realize you don't get anything for free. So, I don't want somebody who's selling me the magic thing and then here you go, you're done. Yeah, so there's a lot of law on copywriting legal documents. I mean, legal documents generally are not copyrightable. I put a copyright on my trust because, there are things in there that are unique to it. And if some other attorney I caught using the exact thing, there could be some recourse I could have against them. But in general, you can't copyright a concept. You can't patent an idea. So anybody who also tells you, this trust is so magic, I'm the only one that has the language, nobody else could ever do it. And by the way, it's 300 grand. That's a run from them trust. I can tell you already. I don't know of any trust that's 300 grand. I've been doing the bridge trust for 30 years. Had lots and lots of clients have to use the bridge trust. We've tested it. We've triggered it many, many, many times. Worked every time. Never had a court force any money out of the trust. And we'll talk about the incentives around, what a plaintiff's really looking for, because that's what drives this. And again, everything is not done in a box. Everything is done with an understanding of what is it that is how the system works. If you don't understand how the system works, then you could buy the best brake pads in the world for your cars. Like, these are the best brake pads in the world. And then you realize that they don't work with your car. They're not fit for your system. So what I find is that what people don't understand is they don't understand the system of a lawsuit. They don't understand the progression of a lawsuit, how it unfolds, what the motivations and incentives are for all the parties involved, and ultimately what's going to resolve it. And I can tell you that the asset protection is just a little piece of it. It's an important piece, but it is by no means the magic solution that just solves all the problems. It's just a component that gives you a better hand that you're being dealt, right? It's like an ace up your sleeve, but it doesn't guarantee an outcome. It gives you leverage. That's what you want. You want leverage when you don't have necessarily all the cards, especially in a system that's stacked against you. S-corps are something you just need to have a lot of understanding around. It's kind of like a gun, really important and effective, but used wrong, it can hurt you, right? So you need to be careful when you're using them and make sure you're using them for exactly the right purpose at the right time. I did a tax master's and I was taking every trust and estate class I possibly could, and I can promise you we never went this deep. It's just they never got to it. I had to learn all this on my own real time. So this is a lot. Yeah, I mean, again, the trick with trust is that they're so flexible that it's kind of easy to lie and mislead with trust. That's why there's so many scams focused around trust. So many tax scams that are focused around, oh, do this trust, you're not gonna, and that's why they're charging, 300 grand, 100 grand, whatever, for a system. Because when you say, hey, we're gonna save you taxes with this magic trust, well, sheesh. I mean, if you're gonna save, $1 million in taxes over the next 3 years, it's probably worth 100 grand. It's a scam. And there's so many of them. And I'm still surprised how many calls I get with people pitching this to me. Clients that say, hey, I found this trust, can you tell me? And I mean, it takes me about 30 seconds, 2 seconds to say it's a scam. It just doesn't exist, right? So also, if you go to my social media, you can see some of those reaction videos that I've done where people are talking about those trusts. It's just my name.